The year was 1919, and a sinister figure lurked in the shadows of New Orleans, striking without warning. The city held its breath, each night darker and more uncertain than the last. He was known only as the Axeman, a phantom with an axe, an unseen menace who turned warm, familiar homes into scenes of unspeakable terror. An unseen menace, known only as the Axeman, haunted their nights, leaving behind a trail of blood and terror that haunted every street corner. He struck in the dead of night, catching his victims unaware, with no chance to escape his merciless hand. His presence became a shadow over the city, a nightmare from which there seemed no waking. The city of New Orleans was no stranger to secrets. It lived and breathed in dark alleys and hidden courtyards, its mysteries concealed beneath the flickering street lamps and whispered over the brass sounds of jazz echoing down Bourbon Street. But in the spring of 1919, an evil stalked its cobblestone streets, leaving fear embedded in the very souls of its inhabitants. That was when the Axemen came, a darkness incarnate. They called him the Axeman of New Orleans, and his reign of terror would forever become a dark chapter in the city's storied history. He appeared with no warning and left without a trace, striking down his victims in the dead of night. His presence loomed like a shadow, his face never seen, his name never spoken, only the chilling certainty of his axe remaining in his wake. In times of fear, communities must come together, find strength in unity, and lift each other up just as we can lift this channel by sharing, subscribing, and letting our voices be heard. Let us keep the spirit alive, just as the people of New Orleans did in the face of darkness. It began in May of 1918. The sweltering Louisiana heat had settled in early, thick and relentless, making the nights unbearable. But even the heat could not compare to the suffocating dread that cloaked New Orleans as the bodies began to appear. They were found in their homes, murdered in their beds, their heads split open with an axe that was often left at the scene, a grotesque signature, a reminder of the faceless menace haunting the city. Some victims were Italian grocers, others mere working-class families, all seemingly connected by nothing but the brutality of their deaths. The first victims were Joseph and Catherine Maggio. They were discovered by Joseph's brothers, who like everyone else could make no sense of the carnage. The door had been locked, the windows closed. How had the Axemen come and gone so easily, like a phantom slipping through the night? Catherine's head had nearly been severed, while Joseph lay motionless in a pool of his own blood. The police came, asked questions, and left with no answers. The city was gripped by shock, the kind that turned neighbors into strangers and made every creak of the floorboards at night a reason to bolt awake. With each new death, the legend of the Axemen grew. They spoke of him in hushed voices at the marketplace, in cafes, and in bars. Some said he was an evil spirit from the bayou, an avenging demon summoned by the city's sins. Others believed he was a living man, perhaps even a neighbor, a doctor, or a butcher, someone who knew the city's every hidden corner. The truth was that nobody knew, and that made him all the more terrifying. Anna Ricci, a young widow who lived alone, listened to these stories with a mix of fear and fascination. Her late husband had been a fisherman, and though his passing had left her with little to her name, Anna found a way to survive. Her small apartment above an Italian grocer's shop was modest, but it was enough. As the Axemen's legend spread, Anna found herself taking extra care with her locks, peering out her window at every noise, wondering if he might come for her too. And then, one night, he did. It was a Friday in March. The oppressive humidity had given way to an unexpected chill, and the crescent moon hung low in the sky. Anna had retired early, her eyes heavy from a day spent working in the market. She bolted her door, as she always did, and settled into her small bed, wrapping herself in a thin quilt. Sleep came quickly, but it would not last. Heart pounding, she lay frozen, her breath caught in her throat. In the silence that followed, she could hear her own pulse, the thudding of her heart so loud it seemed to shake the room. She strained her ears for any sound, praying she had imagined it, that it was a stray cat or a drunken neighbor, anything but what her gut told her. A floorboard creaked. This time, it was closer. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was in her apartment. Slowly, she slid her hand beneath her pillow, fingers curling around the handle of a small knife she kept there. She barely dared to breathe, each inhale feeling like it would give her away. The creaking grew louder, closer, until she could see the dark outline of a figure in the doorway of her bedroom. He stood there for a moment, as if savoring the fear that hung in the air, then took a step forward. The moonlight filtered in through the thin curtains, illuminating the glint of metal in his hand. An axe. Anna stifled a gasp, her mind racing as she tried to think. She had no time, no chance to escape. It was him, the Axeman, and he was in her home. With a burst of courage born from desperation, she lunged from her bed, the knife aimed at the dark figure. The Axeman was quick. He stepped back, the blade missing him by inches, and then he swung. The axe came down, slicing through the air, the sound like a whip cracking. Anna ducked, her shoulder slamming into the floor, pain shooting through her arm. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes on the open window. It was her only chance. She ran, the cold air stinging her face as she dove through the window, her hands scraping against the rough brick. She landed hard on the ground below, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her. But she did not stop. She got up and ran, her bare feet slapping against the pavement, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, she heard the sound of the Axeman's footsteps, steady and unhurried, as if he knew there was nowhere she could go that he could not follow. Anna ran until she reached the street, her cries for help echoing through the empty night. Lights flickered on in the windows above, and she heard the distant shout of a man. The footsteps behind her stopped. She turned, her chest heaving, and saw only darkness where he had been. The Axeman was gone. The police arrived, took her statement, and searched her apartment. They found the shattered glass, the axe lying in the middle of her floor, but no sign of the intruder. They told her she was lucky, that she had escaped with her life. But Anna knew better. She knew that the Axeman was still out there, somewhere in the city, waiting for his next victim. The newspapers ran her story the next day, the headline reading, "Axeman strikes again, victim escapes." The people of New Orleans read it with a mix of horror and fascination, their fear growing with each new account. The Axeman was no longer just a legend, he was real, and he was unstoppable. Weeks passed, and the city was plunged into a state of paranoia. Locks were reinforced, windows were barred, and families took to sleeping in shifts, always keeping watch. The police patrolled the streets at night, their presence meant to reassure the frightened citizens, but it did little to ease their fears. The Axeman seemed to move like a ghost, slipping through the cracks of the city, striking without warning, and disappearing without a trace. Then, in late March, a letter was published in the local newspaper. It was addressed to the people of New Orleans, and it was signed by the Axeman himself. The letter was chilling, written in a mocking tone that spoke of his love for jazz music. He claimed that he would spare any home where a jazz band played that night, daring the people of the city to fill their homes with music if they wished to live. The letter ended with a promise he would strike again, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop him. The night the Axeman had chosen came, and New Orleans was alive with the sound of jazz. Bands played in homes, in bars, on street corners. The music was loud, defiant, a challenge to the Axeman, and a show of solidarity among the people. The city held its breath, waiting to see if the music would save them. And it did. The Axeman did not strike that night. For the first time in months, the people of New Orleans felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced the darkness together, and they had survived. But the Axeman was not finished. He struck again in August, claiming another victim, and then another in October. The fear returned, stronger than ever, and the city once again fell under his shadow. The police were powerless, the people helpless. The Axeman seemed to vanish as quickly as he had appeared, his reign of terror ending as mysteriously as it had begun. The Axeman of New Orleans was never caught. His identity remained a mystery, his motives unknown. He was a phantom, a ghost story told in hushed voices, a reminder of the thin line between safety and danger. The city moved on, the jazz music once again filling the streets. People laughed and danced, trying to mask the lingering fear that remained unspoken. But beneath the surface, the fear lingered, a part of the city's soul, a dark chapter that would never truly be forgotten.